What's happening, Panda Nation? Peter Von Panda here. I'm going to tell you today what I love and hate about my 2014 Maserati Ghibli. Right out here with my Maserati Ghibli, and I want to show you the things that I love and hate about it. Let's start with the exterior. First of all, I want to tell you, when I was looking at cars, I was actually looking at the Alfa Romeo Giulia too. That car really spoke to me. It's a really great design in my opinion. It's kind of small, yet it's kind of brutish looking. But, you know, when I was looking at my other options here, and I was looking for a car that was kind of sporty and maybe a little bit youthful and maybe something you don't see every day, this one was also on my list. And ultimately what it came down to was I liked, you know, the idea that you don't see a lot of these, you know, especially on my block and my neighborhood, you see a lot of different cars. And, you know, you don't see a lot of these even still. So that was kind of a big selling point for me. So I wanted to get this. The other big difference maker, the decision maker for me, was that the Giulias are widely available in rear-wheel drive, but not a lot in all-wheel drive. And that was a big problem because, especially in the winter here or bad weather, you want at least front-wheel drive, if not all-wheel drive. But most of the Maseratis are what they call the Q4 model, and that means that they are all-wheel drive. Actually, the Q4 designation carries over to the Alfa Romeos too. So the nice thing about this is it's all-wheel drive. It's not all-wheel drive all the time. It buys itself to the rear-wheel drive, but that was a big decider for me too. Now, one of the things that I really liked about this, even though this is a pretty big car, I think it classifies itself as a mid-size sedan, was this rakish front end. So the front end dips down quite a bit here, and it's actually very similar in some ways to my Grand Sport, and so it gives it kind of that aggressive look. And I really liked that this front lower lip here on the fascia actually extends out pretty far, and there's a couple pros and cons to that. Is that it gives it kind of an underbite look, and it gives it a little bit more of an aggressive look. The problem with it is that, and why most car companies get rid of it, is it really reduces your approach angle. And so what they've done here, and one of the things that I like, are these little plastic combs in front of the front wheels, so you can hear when it's scraping. They're kind of like, modern curb feelers. But, you know, I like the fact that they didn't sacrifice style for practicality. So I actually really like that. Now, I also love the paint on this car. It's actually really nice. It is just, it's not flat, but it's a non-metallic black, and it's very reflective. Now, I've had black cars in the past because I like them, because they're badass, and most of them come with some sort of metallic flake in them. For instance, a lot of them will come color code like anthracite or something like that, but this black is just a universal gloss black, and I think it looks great. In fact, it really doesn't have a lot of orange peel in it either, like a lot of cars will. So I don't know the history of this that much, so I don't know if it was ever wet sanded and buffed. I don't think so, but I think what they've done here is just done a nice job at executing the paint. One of the things that I hate here is these 18-inch wheels. These suck. I did go to the tire shop, to NTB, and looked at replacing the tires on these, and the funny thing is he said that these tires are typically reserved for crossover sport utilities because they have a huge sidewall. 18 inches here are usually pretty big for cars, but on this car they look pretty small. They don't look horrible, but the 19s or 20 inches I think look so much better. And so instead of replacing these wheels, and I'll talk a little bit about when we go on the drive, with new tires just on the existing wheels, I think I will just upgrade to 20-inch rims at some point, and then just get to the, you know, the lower profile tires at that point, because these summer tires actually aren't particularly good. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about here too is the back end of this Ghibli, which I actually think is the weakest part of the car. So the problem to me is it pinches. You've got kind of this little step down here, which, you know, you've got these lines that give it like a strong haunch, but then they don't go all the way up to the top of the tailgate there, and so it kind of pinches and kind of rounds out, feathers back here in a way that isn't nice, big, flat back end, kind of like the Quattroporte. So even though the styling elements are all the same, because the Quattroporte has a nice, big, flat back end to it, kind of almost like a Daytona or something like that, a Shelby Daytona, it gives it a kind of a more muscular back end. One of the things that I think they needed to do here was raise up the deck here a little bit with a factory spoiler, or a lip spoiler at least, and that's I think one of the things that I will do there. They make a bunch of them in carbon fiber. The smaller one I think is just fine. I've seen some that go all the way to the edge here. Most of them just sit on this top lip there, but I think it's almost necessary to help fill out the back end just a little bit. So I will also show you, if we pop the trunk here, trunk goes all the way up, which is really nice. And a couple of things that I like is that this is a really huge trunk. You can actually fit a ton of stuff in here. So this is a great weekender car. It's a great travel car. You can put golf bags in here. One of the things that I hate is underneath this is an aftermarket trunk band here. But one of the things that I hate is this battery placement. So it's a big battery, it's relatively expensive, and when I got this car I wanted to replace a battery because I didn't want to have to worry about it. I wanted to put the big tail on for charging, but this battery is an absolute pain in the ass to get out. You would think, hey, it's right here in the trunk, it's actually going to be a lot easier to get out, but the bracket there, right there in the center, in that little ridge, you can see kind of there's a lengthwise bracket that holds it in. There's also a nylon strap, you can see it there, that silver strap that goes all the way around. The bracketry on top of the post is just a pain in the ass to get off. Getting this in and out was a major pain, so I will fully admit to that. So if you're going to do it, set aside a few hours to do it, because it might take you that long, and it's really heavy. The other thing I don't like here is these inflatable spares. So one of the things that I thought is, oh man, this car's been sitting a while, the spare tire has deflated. But that's actually the way it comes, and so you're supposed to actually use that inflator right there to inflate this tire if you have a flat tire. Now, one of the things that worries me is I actually tried to inflate it because I thought it was supposed to be inflated, and the inflator that I was using didn't work because the way it sits there, it's not really beaded in. Like, that bead isn't really rolled against the lip. And so one of the things that I worry about is, like, you get stuck somewhere, you're inflating this tire and it never inflates because of the way it's deflated and just kind of rolls in, kind of dries up and rolls in against the rim. So that's one thing I worry about and that I really don't like. I guess the idea that you actually have a spare is better than not, because so many don't even come with a spare anymore, but I just don't really like the spare at all. Now, the other thing I will say here is that this car doesn't have parking sensors, front or rear. Now, I actually wish they were on the rear, but I actually purposely did not want them on the front, because so many people have complained that you are in a drive-through, you're parking the car, and the sensors are going off, and especially if you're in a drive-through behind another car, they're so loud that the people on the other end of the radio or the speaker can't actually hear you. So I wish they were on the rear here, but they don't come with it on this trim level. Now, the other thing I want to show you here, and if I get it out of my pocket, is the key. And my key here is covered with a leather cover. I actually reviewed this, but you might be able to see here that it's big, and in the bottom there you can see that there are two clamshell aluminum pieces that clamp onto a standard plastic key fob. That gives this key fob a really big and weighty feel, and in some ways it's pretty nice, but you put this cover on it and it's almost too big to do anything else with it. Now, if you want to show off your key and throw them on the table and be like, listen, this is what I drive, more power to you. But having a small key is kind of nice. But I do like the fact that they went ahead and did something special with the key, made it feel premium, made it look a little different than the other FCA products, because there are a lot of car companies that have keys that will look exactly like, the parent company. So Aston Martin used the Volvo keys for a while. You get any of the premium Fords or Lincolns, a lot of those use the exact same remote. So it's at least nice that they did something different, despite the fact that it's probably too big to really carry around comfortably. The other thing that I hate here is this B-pillar right here. So what you can see is that because of their frameless windows, so there's no frame around the glass, what you have is this B-pillar, and then you have kind of is almost a finger wide piece of opening that goes to the door seal right there. And so it just kind of creates a pretty big break. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I don't like it. And especially if you're washing or waxing your car, you kind of have to open up the door and clean off these seals a little bit with whatever your residual is. The other thing that I don't like as we go around here to the front of the engine, well, I do like the engine, 404 horsepower, that's pretty nice, but the rarity of the spark plugs is kind of a pain. So I actually had to special order them. They were $200. I had to get a special socket, this thin-walled small socket to get the spark plugs out. So I don't like that. I'm not sure, I guess it's a Ferrari thing, but you would think like, hey, why not get, an engine that has the same spark plugs everyone else does. So anyway, it took them forever to get, and like I said, $200 for spark plugs. Not to mention the ignition coils. If you want to order those, are like $200 a piece, and you'll need them in this turbo 6-cylinder. So at some point, this is definitely an engine that you're not going to preemptively replace those types of things. The other thing I want to go back here to is the fuel filler cap, and I actually like this because it is one of the capless ones, denoted by this little flap here, and you can just put in the gas nozzle right in there, and I like that. And I wish that more cars did this because it's kind of a pain to undo that and remove them and put it back on. So it's just kind of nice. All right, so let's go inside. Keyless remote, which I absolutely love. You know, you can just go into it. The windows roll down just a little bit before you get in. I do love the frameless windows here. I want to show you that. It actually reminds me a lot of the Infiniti M45. Was that like 2003, 2004 maybe? I really love those. It kind of gave it a sporty look. The windows are pretty nicely insulated, so you don't get a ton of road noise, but in this car, I think you want a little bit of it. I also will say that I liked the seats here, and one of the reasons is because they feel better than they look. So they have what looks like pretty aggressive bolsters on the sides and down on the bottom, but they don't feel overly tight. So I remember my buddy's Mercedes C63, and man, you know, you were just kind of scrunched right in the middle. But these look pretty sporty, but they're really comfortable. Now, I will say that when we get in it, the adjustment that I don't like is that they are all canted back a little bit, and there's no way to really get them, the bottom portion canted forward in a way that I truly like, but overall they're pretty comfortable. But I wish they would adjust just a slight bit more to give me a more luxury car feel than kind of the sporty car feel. The other thing is that I actually like, and it's probably going to be hard to see here, is this door handle. So we have this aluminum strip that goes all the way through here to the door handle, and then it's got this twisted piece right there. It looks great. It looks nicely integrated. It looks very intentional. But then right behind it, and you might be able to see it right back there, is that there is a little LED strip. So these get lit up when you get into them, and it's kind of nice to have that white light back there. It's kind of a small touch that really just adds a little bit of, you know, luxury and flair to it. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start this sucker up. And one of the things that I want to show you here is I actually did a review on this little cap that I put on the start button. You do have to hit the brake pedal, and then you start it up like this, and the car fires up. And I like push button start, but what I don't like is the angle of this. And I use my thumb to actually start it because that's kind of a more natural angle. The other thing that I don't like is this accept button right on the screen. You always have to press that, and then I'm going to just make sure that the volume is turned down. There's a software update that will just go beyond that accept button after like 60 seconds if you don't press it, and mine doesn't do that, so I might check and see if that's available, but if it's not, that's kind of annoying. Now, I will say that this is the Uconnect screen. A lot of people have talked about it. So it's the same thing in most of the FCA products. It'll look very similar to everything from the Dodge Dart to the Jeeps, but I actually like it. Obviously, it's branded here in the blue color scheme like Maserati is known for, and so it's all the same except for the color scheme, and I actually like that. I think it's great because it's very familiar. It's super easy to use. It doesn't look like the most luxurious thing, but honestly I'd rather give up kind of a little bit of that look and just get something that's dead nuts reliable. The one thing I do hate about this is that this plastic screen in later years, I think maybe the 2017 or 2018 model, became a little bit more smaller, but also like a piano finish or something. This matte plastic here doesn't look great. It matches a lot of this other plastic. I don't think you get in and it screams that it's cheap plastic, but I have seen some aftermarket carbon fiber pieces that replace this, which I'm kind of tempted to do, but since I don't have carbon fiber anywhere else, I don't think it'll really match. But I wish that it were either like a metallic finish or even a carbon fiber or a piano black finish. So I think it would have just given it a little bit richer look. The other thing I will say here is on any trim, and I don't have the high-end trim, but everything is leather wrapped. Now you might say, hey, I can't really tell here because this leather type of texture is pretty much in every luxury car, and I actually didn't really think that either. It's got a nice soft touch, you know, and obviously the seats are leather, but and the doors are even covered in leather. Where I really noticed it is when I was replacing the light on the bottom of the door panel. What I actually saw is the leather wrapped around the edge, and when you pull out that light, it kind of pulls that unglued edge away. And so what I realized is that they have manufactured everything and then wrapped it in leather. On some of the higher end ones, it's a little more obvious because they'll do like a French seam around the kind of the contours. But what it kind of blows my mind is that everything is wrapped in leather. And if I go down here to the start button, which you might be able to see is where they've actually sewn it together. So even though at a glance this looks like a nice textured soft touch plastic, it is truly wrapped in leather. I mean, and that's what kind of blows my mind, and that's really one of the reasons that I think you end up stepping up in price point on these because it's kind of those small touches. Now, do I think you need to do it? It probably adds to the aroma in here. So this car has, 47,000 miles on it now, but it still smells really nice. It smells good getting in it. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons, because you have so much leather. But is it one of those things that just would register with me every time I got in the car? Probably not. Or even people that get in it, versus a Mercedes or an Audi that maybe doesn't have as much leather here. I think it's probably a big expense without as much added value as one would expect, but it's pretty nice. I have no problems with it. All right. The other thing I want to say here is that I love this matte wood trim. You've got the center console and on the doors here. The car that I remember seeing it first on was the Mercedes CLS when those first came out, and they had kind of a big swath of matte wood on there. I love that look because it's not as shiny. It doesn't almost look as fake. So you get real wood trim. You can see the irregularities and imperfections in the wood. Now, one thing I don't like about it is I don't like this chocolate color per se. On a newer version of the Ghibli, I think, and in the Levante, they have a wood that is matte finish, but like almost a gray or tan look. It's kind of very Scandinavian to me, and I love that. That looks great. If this were a little bit of lighter tone, I think I would like it a little bit more, but I do like it as it is. It's just not the brown that I would really like. It's got a very kind of oak look to it, a little more traditional, but I do like it. Now, if I had my choice to go away from the wood, to another wood, like I think it's a Zambrano wood and it's a glossy finish, I probably wouldn't have done that. But the one that I probably would have liked is the carbon fiber one. That looks pretty good, and you can replace all these. Now, there are really 5 pieces to the interior trim here. This whole piece you can get together, and then 4 of these door inserts. And I will say, if you like the car and want to transfer or convert these wood pieces into something else, it's actually remarkably easy to do in this car, almost shockingly easy. So this whole piece will lift out. I've done it before. You've got to take off the shifter, and then you can lift this out, and then you can disconnect. There's probably about 6 or 7 connectors underneath here, but those just pop out. And so in terms of replacing all the wood in a car, I don't know that there's a car that I've ever even heard of that is as easy as the Maserati Ghibli. So just kind of something to think about. If you're getting one with, you don't like the interior and you want to change it later, you can pay $1,000 for a new interior kit and swap that in. Now, one of the things that I might show you here is that this little door here is actually an access point where you can mount the flappy paddles to it. So they would take this out. There's a flappy paddle kit, a bracket that goes on there. I think if you take it to the dealership, it's about $1,200 to retrofit. This car did not have it when I got it, and I loved that. I don't want the flappy paddles on this car because one of the problems that people have mentioned is that you can't reach the turn signal stalks and whatnot. And having those flappy paddles in this car is not totally antithetical, but it's totally ridiculous in this car. I mean, it's a 5-person maybe sedan, and it's not a sports car, although it has sporting intentions. I do not want to drive this with a paddle shifter. Even my Grand Sport, which has the paddles in it, I don't really like driving it. I like driving it on the automatic mode, but on that car, I will switch over to paddles. But on this car, I wanted to basically do more of like sporty touring than sport driving, if that makes sense. So I'm going to get in and drive with friends. I like the sound. I like how quick it is, but I'm not going to sit there and shift it and act like this is a sports car, because if you really want a sports car, get another sports car. The sport sedan thing, I think, is like overplayed at this point. Now, a couple things I want to show you here about music. So you can see it says SD card right there, and if I flip this open, you have an SD card slot in there, which would make a lot of sense to put your music on and then load it in there, but I could never get the SD card working. I spent some time online trying to figure out what the songs were supposed to be formatted like, but the USB port down here, you can see I have a micro flash drive in there, and that allows me to actually get to my music on the flash drive itself. So that's pretty awesome. Extreme, more than words. And so the nice thing is it doesn't take up much space, and it's super plug and play, and there's an aux jack in there as well, and you can see how that closes up. Now, the one thing I do hate about this is here, if you open up these cup holders, there's a couple things. these cup holders are like European size, so they are too small for most American drinks, and that is annoying. What they did in the later years is that they actually enlarged them, but because they did that, you didn't have the cover to cover up the cup holder. So I like this because it cleans up the look here. But on the new ones, there are just two holes here with much larger cup holders. So I guess it's a choice. Do you want the practicality of the cup holders, or do you want the clean look with the panel closed? And obviously they voted for usable cup holders, which is fine. I think they did a nice job of it, but I do like the clean look of nothing there. Now, the other thing that I don't like is that this cigarette lighter here is the European size cigarette lighter. So most of the USB 12-volt power adapters that you put in here kind of just flop around a little bit, even though they are almost the same size. I want to say the American size is like 21 millimeters, and I think the European is like 22, so they are very, very close. You can kind of get those plugs to work, but you get the European size here, and that small 1 millimeter diameter difference makes a big difference in things that it works with. So just kind of keep that in mind if you've got a plug that you're going to throw in there. Now, the other thing I want to show you here, and it might be a little hard to see in this light, but I think what they do is an Alcantara headliner in the higher trim cars. But because this is a little bit of the lower trim, I think it's just a microfiber, but it does feel a little bit like Alcantara, and kind of brushes, and you can move the grain like it. But man, it is sweet. And for a car to kind of come with a nice headliner makes a lot of difference. You just feel it. It's one of those things, because your eyes are always up here, you kind of see that. So it's just got a really nice texture. It's got a nice look. It feels very premium. I can imagine that if you go with the full Alcantara or something like that, it's going to feel even better. But even on this lower end, you know, it's a pretty nice feature. Now, one of the things that I want to show you here, and it's probably going to be a little hard to see, is because this is the SQ4 model, in the passenger side footwell, you have this intrusion into the passenger footwell right there, this big hump right there. I'm not sure why that's there. Obviously, there must be some four-wheel drive hardware that differs from the two-wheel drive, because in the two-wheel drive, you'll have a pretty clean line, which you can see here on the piping on the floor mat, from here to there. That actually makes a lot of difference in the comfort for the passenger. When I was sitting over here, you have that intruding. It's not so bad like a Celine S7 where it's uncomfortable, but it's just, it feels more spacious and more comfortable in the two-wheel drive version. This is a pretty big difference. It also means that if you're going to replace the floor mats, get aftermarket or something like that, you've got to get it for the two-wheel drive or the four-wheel drive, because they are absolutely different. Now, my favorite feature on this car is a little known feature, that on the passenger side door right there, in the door gap, you can actually store a tube of toothpaste right there. So that's pretty nice. They build that into most of these Maserati Ghiblis, and you know, it's something that you don't get in a lot of cars, so it's pretty awesome that they think about those small things. In terms of the driving modes right here, you can see that we have the manual, which you would use this for, or the paddle shifters if you have it, and you have ICE, increased control and efficiency right there, and you have the sport. Now, one of the things that I want to say here is that I usually put it on ICE, and you can see it lit up right there. And what you have there is the car just kind of toned down in many ways. And one of the things that I like about it is it just drives and sounds a little bit more like a normal car. I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear it here, but I will just hit the gas on ICE mode. And it has kind of a deep, you know, sound, but kind of like still boisterous and sporty. If I put it on sport mode, and you can hear that it like opens up that valve, and even inside here, if I hit it, man, it's just so much louder. And one of the problems with that sport mode is if you're driving in a parking garage, like when I was parked at work, it just is a kind of obnoxious. It is so loud. When you fire up this car and it's in sport mode or driving it out of the parking lot, I mean, everyone looks at you. Like I said, especially in parking garages where you're getting that reverb, that echo. Outside, maybe not as much of a big deal, but you will definitely notice like the difference between sport mode and ICE mode. That is for sure. mention about the interior here, and this is a typical center console that they use in all of the Maseratis. It's push button and then these butterfly doors. What I don't like about them is that it opens up and then you have like 3 or 4 inches of extra height to get over into it a little bit. So I get the fact that it looks cool, it's nice and symmetrical, but to be honest, I'd rather it flip up to the back or even to the side, because that way I can get into it a little easier. This way you have, you know, both people kind of slightly impeded getting into it. Small thing, but, you know, I'm bringing it up. The other thing is, I want to scoot out of here a little bit, is I want to show you how far down this seatbelt buckle is down here. And you've got this tall, flat center console, you know, even more so if I flip up the center console doors there. But when you're sitting here, getting the seatbelt in and then getting it out, because there is a little ridge here as well. This is kind of hollowed in, negative space, and then kind of flares out. Getting it in or out of the seatbelt buckle is a little bit of a pain. And I'll just kind of show you. When you're sitting here like this, you have, you know, you think that you'll follow the side down right to that buckle, but what you have to do is you have to kick in a little bit, and especially when you're getting out, you kind of have to contort your fingers, kind of bend them back to unbuckle it. Again, not the biggest deal in the world, but it's one of those things that you will definitely notice. Everyone will notice it when they're getting into it, because it's not as easy as every other seatbelt buckle. They could probably solve this by putting it up a little higher, but then you probably have the buckle kind of pressing in the side of your body, which is probably not cool either. The other thing I want to show you here is that this rearview mirror is a little weird. So I have a parking tag, you know, when I had a job, that I would hang from my rearview mirror to show that you were allowed to park where you are, but there is no kind of standard stock there, so you can't actually hang anything from your rearview mirror. So if you're used to having fuzzy dice or a parking pass or something like that, you're gonna have to mount it in your window or something, because there's really no place to mount anything on this mirror itself, not in any way that you can actually see it. So something to keep in mind. The other thing that I love about this, and it's a little weird to love it, but you can see I have a door handle right here so I can pull the door closed, but you have no vertical handle right here. And part of the reason, I think, is the practicality of them using FCA parts bin controls here, and the controls go so far forward. If I put a handle here, I might not be able to see or get to them. But what it does is, when you're driving, you're putting your hand here. So many times my hand is canted up like this because of a vertical handle, or you have to kind of pistol grip it or something like that. So it's really nice, especially on long drives, when you can just put your hand here and you've got a nice big open swath here, so I can put it anywhere depending on how long your arm is, and it's not impeded by that vertical handle. Now, on the other side, you do have those handles. So on the passenger side, they do have that, but I actually love the fact that you don't have it. It's kind of a small thing, but I kind of noticed it right away, because you get in another car with those handles and your hand is always doing something funky to accommodate it. The other thing that I don't like about this is, you can see that the hood here on the clock is leather covered. We even have a little stitch there. Is that the base here for the clock is just plastic. Now, it doesn't scream, especially because it's color matched, that it's just cheap plastic, but I would have loved for them to do something with like a metal finish or even leather wrap it or something like that. But it's kind of like this oddball plastic piece that just kind of stands out. Now, the clock is nice, but it's not like a super great clock. It is absolutely a clock that works with the car. The blue face there to match kind of the blue dials that Maserati is known for in their more sport mode. The other thing that they do here is kind of this oval egg-shaped clock, which is kind of typical in all of them. But the thing that really sells it is they have put like a very large bezel on it. So it's, you know, 4 or 5 millimeters deep, and that gives it some depth and heft to it in a way that makes it look pretty good. Now, in terms of detail on the clock, this doesn't have much, only hour markers. But the hands there are skeletonized, which actually match the hands that you get on the instrument cluster. So I like the fact that they have carried it over, and I think it works pretty well. It looks pretty good. Certainly looks a lot better than most cars. But if you were to compare this to some cars that do clocks super well, like the Bentleys, and I think they use Breitling as their brand, and then even like the Porsche, are just absolutely stunning looking. This is good, but they could have added some more detail to it to kind of bring it up to a level. So it's not at the Porsche or the Bentley level. And I might even say, you know, the Mercedes tend to look a little bit richer to me, but this is a pretty nice clock for what you get. One of the things that I hate on the instrument cluster here is that you can change the screen to be a lot of different things, but I have it here on the music so that I know what song or radio station I'm on. But they always have this background of these musical notes there, which I just think look a little tacky and stupid. It's a Uconnect thing, but I wish they almost would not have that, because I don't know, it just looks goofy to me. Traveling down the steering wheel, I want to show you that this little design here, this kind of Y-shaped design, mimics the shape on the key fob itself. But this little chrome piece here is not just plastic covered. You know, we have some chrome over here, and I think these are maybe coated pieces of plastic, but this is like metal, and it feels great. It feels heavy, and it's one of those things where it looks fine, and it's not until you touch it that you realize, man, this is a serious piece of hardware that they put down here, which is kind of nice, and it's super deep, and so it just gives it a nice look. The other thing I like about the steering wheel here is that how deep it goes. So they've kind of rolled the leather over the top here, and you have maybe 3 or 4 inches kind of deep here, so it doesn't look like it's kind of a piece that's levitating on top of an airbag. It really rolls over, gives the steering wheel a really deep look here, and it's kind of nice. So I like that kind of subtle design to it. I also, on the steering wheel, love that we have the radio controls mounted on the back. This is totally Chrysler. So we have the radio and volume, as well as the switchgear. These are all Chrysler switchgear here. It's very familiar, you know, and they work great. And I can rotate the volume up or down, and then they have a mode button in the middle. So it's nice because you don't have to relearn anything. On some of the older Maseratis, like the mid-2000 Quattroportes, they also had controls on the back, and no one could figure out what they did, and I'm not actually sure that they did anything. So let's take a look at the back seat. All right, getting in the back seat. Oh, got my jacket in here. There are a few things that I love and hate about it. Yeah, first thing is I've got my seat where I would drive it as a 5'8" person, and the back legroom is fine, but it's not great. If I were 6 foot, you can imagine that you'd be putting your toes under here. There is enough space that I can get my feet under there, but this is pretty minimal. In fact, I want to say that it's not a lot bigger than my old Audi A4. And so if you are trying to drive people around in comfort in the back seat, this is probably a car that you want to think about twice. I will say that for me, it's absolutely fine. I don't usually carry a lot of people, and when I do, if they're sitting back here, no matter how tall you are, you know, this is probably enough. You know, we're not going to go on long road trips like this. I will say that one of the cars that I really loved was the Fisker Karma, the original one, and I just love the looks, but the back seat legroom in those is terrible, you know, kind of like the Aston Martin Rapide, and even the Porsche Panamera to some extent. You know, not a huge amount of room, but if you're my height, a fair amount of room. The other thing that I actually like is that the cup holders are covered up by these 2 panels. One of the things is they still look a little cheap and flimsy, like plastic, but I like the fact that they're kind of gone and out of sight, out of mind when you're sitting in the back here. So many of them have the cup holders. They get filled with stuff. They get scratched up. They're cheap plastic, and they really take away from the look. Now, in later model Ghiblis, they have just done away with these flip-up things, which are probably prone to breaking. But I like the fact that they're there. The other thing that I want to show you here in the back, and it's probably going to be a little hard to see, is you've got the headliner that kind of comes down here, but then it kicks up right here. And that's actually really nice because you can actually have pretty tall people sitting in the back because, you know, I've got the headliner here, but then it goes up so high over here that even for me, again, 5'8", pretty long torso, you can see here, I've got pretty nice headroom. Now, if I were just moving forward, I can hit the ceiling, but if I'm sitting back in a comfortable way, I actually have nice headroom there, which is pretty awesome for back seat. I like the thought that went into the designing of the space in the back here. So how does this sucker drive? So how does the car drive? First of all, backing out, I will tell you that I miss having the moving trajectory lines on rear view cameras. Having distance lines are great, but the trajectory lines are really nice to have too. Now, one of the things that you might notice is that when you're driving this car and you're taking a turn at a very slow speed, one of the things that I felt is like the tires breaking free. And I actually thought there was something wrong with the rear suspension. And then I went online to the forums, and this is where I found out that a lot of people complain about that, kind of the tire slipping with summer tires. And I'm not sure if it's because of the setup or whatnot, but a lot of guys say that if you go to all weather, then you don't have that problem anymore. So like I said, I'm gonna wait until I go to a larger wheel size before I switch out out my tires because these tires are still in really good shape. So you kind of have to get used to that. You know, some people call it hopping or slipping. You know, people refer to it as different things, but it does happen in this car. I've never noticed it in other cars, even with summer tires. Hoping that it's not anything major and it's just the same thing that a lot of other people are getting. Now, I am driving the car in sport mode here. We'll try to get out to some open roads because even in sport mode, you know, the suspension, I don't think really changes that much because I don't have the adaptive skyhook suspension in here, but it's really that exhaust note as well as the shifts and the shifting points that change the most. So we will get out here to the road. So I probably don't have to go into a lot of detail. You know, as I've been driving around, she's pretty quick. She definitely spools up when you get on the gas, and she feels good for a big car and for a 6-cylinder turbo, and it gets a lot of attention, and it's an enjoyable car to drive. Do Maseratis have their foibles and quirks? For sure, and hopefully I won't discover a lot of those with this car, but it actually is going to go into the shop and have some work done because the climate control is acting up a little bit. So hopefully that's not a big deal, but it will certainly go in my annual report about what it's like to own this car. So if you're looking for a car with some style and something that's reasonably practical, and they aren't that expensive anymore, I think you definitely might want to check out the Ghiblis. That's it. I love mine. Peter Von Panda. Out.